And good morning and welcome everyone to the stream today. Over the last few months, I've been looking around in YouTube and I've seen an increase in the problems that the police have been having with people with different types of different disabilities, not just here in Australia, but in the UK and America and the US as well. So I think there's a bit of a gap there. I thought there's a bit of a gap there. So I got in contact with the New South Wales Police Commissioner's Office to come and talk today about um, police interactions with people with different types of disabilities. And the Assistant Commissioner, Mr. Tony Cooke, agreed to come and talk to us today. So thanks, Tony, for coming.
Thanks, Jeff.
Um, like I said, there's been a bit of an increase, and I think that's through social media that there's been issues between police and people with different types of different disabilities. So, can you just let everyone know when police are going through training at the academy, what sort of training does that entail?
Jeff, I'll move to that in 3 seconds. So just to introduce myself, I'm the Assistant Commissioner in charge of police in what we call our Central Metropolitan Region, which is effectively 1/3 of the Sydney Basin. So I've got about 2,500 police under my command in 10 commands. But apart from that, I also have a corporate responsibility across the communities portfolio, which encompasses our our LGBT community, our multicultural community, and our aging, homeless, people with disabilities communities, because um, members of communities move across and between and are parts of a range of communities. So, and I've got the good fortune actually to have this sponsorship, if you like, because it does bring me um, into contact with a range of different community people who have a range of different issues. And days like today, Jeff, and I do thank you for your invitation, are a good opportunity for me to be able to speak with community, but listen and find out what some of the problems are. And if there are things today that I'm not aware of, or I'm not fully briefed in terms of specific matters, I'll get back to you very directly. And I'm happy to do this again into the future if it's something that you think is beneficial.
Yep,
Uh,
no,
in,
thank
in,
you.
in terms of our generalised training, um, training for police occurs from the day that we walk into the um, police academy to continuing education that even assistant commissioners undertake. Only recently, our training in relation to our response to people suffering some form of condition or having a disability or having an episode of by reason of some other issue um, has been remodeled, redesigned, so that we really are focusing on um, responding to what is occurring in front of us, so that we are not predisposed to some thought about what might be occurring, but realistically, with um, an absolute emphasis on um, controlling ourselves, controlling the environment, listening, responding, um, de-escalating, so that we can then uh, deal with whatever the issue might be. Um, so that is the real focus for us at the moment, and that's going right through from our uh, fundamental training for probationary constables through to role and rank specific training. So sergeants, for example, whilst they will receive the fundamental training and continue to refresh, they will also receive that training about what's expected of sergeants in these situations to attend, take control, make sure that we are applying the principles that we're really looking for, so that we're dealing with people, we're controlling an environment to make and provide space and to make everyone safe, so that we can then focus on what in fact the issues are to get the best outcomes. That training um, includes for a young student at the academy 18 hours of actual practical training. So apart from the you might suggest academic or educational training, to actual role play practical training of situations within the village down at the Goulburn Academy, where we can set up scenario based training. And in that training, there are um, a whole range of structures and domestic settings, commercial settings, a whole range of public street settings where the students are able to apply the skills that they're learning as part of the education. And as then we move out of the academy, we've only recently, in fact, in the last several months, moved to the fact that now every year, every police officer will receive training in relation to our responses each and every year. So one year it will be online training, because very clearly training 17 or 18,000 sworn officers is a big task. But the executive have seen the need to really focus on this training and really revitalise it, so that each and every year, every officer, and that will be from every probationary constable to the commissioner, will receive training in an online sense one year, and then in a practical hands-on sense the next year moving forward, which I think is a really good advance, and I think is an acknowledgement of the fact that we really do need to focus on this area. So there's quite a range of extensive training that occurs. It occurs also in, apart from the foundational stuff to each and every police officer, specialist training occurs. Certainly detectives training courses involves very specific and very much more detailed information in dealing with people with a disability and the rights and obligations that we have to protect the interests of those people. It's certainly very pertinent also at the moment in developing our coercive control legislation in the domestic violence sense, that training package we have been assisted in the development of that training package for police by staff from the Ageing and Disability Commission and also Legal Aid. So we're consulting a range of people in a range of areas to really make our training absolutely specific, relevant, and effective, but very much focusing on that response of controlling the environment, controlling ourselves, providing space and time to really be able to decipher what the issues are so that we can come to safe outcomes.
Right. So you're talking, you touched on a little bit about the practical training at the academy village.
Yes.
So what does that entail? What do you mean by that? Is that like you said, like scenarios?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And the academy, it's come on a long way from my attendance down there 35 years ago, but
Yeah.
they've got to a point down there where there are scenario villages, so there are structures. So the scenario can be conducted in a domestic setting. It can be conducted in a retail type setting. It can be conducted in a public street type setting. So what the academy and their staff down there are doing is actually quite remarkable, which applies to our training across the board. But in these specific areas, these scenarios involving dealing with people with a disability, with other afflictions, and in other circumstances, is inbuilt in as part of the training.
Are you able to give us an example of scenarios that the police use?
No, I don't have one off
No.
the top of my head, but I can certainly get back to you with some of that work, because it's quite important for us in terms of that training, because apart from dealing and resolving situations on the street, such as it might be, there are at times where people with a disability also come into our custody, which is then the meeting of a range of obligations that we must meet to protect the rights of people with a disability and to make sure that our staff are aware of those. So let me work on that, Jeff, and when we come together next time, I'll be able to walk you through that.
Yeah, that sounds good because yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about since I reached out to your office was um, there's so many different types of disabilities, and it affects everyone in a different way, on an individual basis. So I can understand that the police can't have one scenario that covers everyone who's blind or vision impaired, or everyone who's deaf or hearing impaired, or has an intellectual disability. Um, I understand that. That's why I was asking, if you can give me a scenario. It'd be good to just to let everyone know that, um, yeah, how the police are being trained, and what areas may need improving.
And that would be good. And we're also happy to take advice and consult. And I know that the commander who is part of development of that program, they've consulted a range of clinicians as they go through in development of that training. And that training continues to develop. But what I would go to saying what's really important for us in the development of the training is that so many different symptoms or disabilities or afflictions or other issues result in behaviours or result in a situation occurring, which is why it's so important that our training actually really does focus on um, getting control of the environment, making people safe, managing and thinking about our own response and what is necessary and what is not, so that at the very base level, if you like, that regardless of what might be the cause of a situation, the actual environment and the people involved in it, our priority needs to be the safety of all involved at the time, because once that occurs, then we can move through. Just excuse me, that's emails appearing in systems that I don't know how to turn off. But
No, you're right.
um, um, once that occurs and we have control, and that's for everyone involved, as you find in our day-to-day working in the community, taking the sting out of situations and making people feel comfortable and making people feel respected and making people feel heard really goes a long way to um, being able to actually interact with people to come to a conclusion and to find out what's really occurring so that we can actually find a solution. Now, in some situations, that's impacted by other matters occurring upon people at the time, but generally speaking, that first contact and gaining control and winning people and building people's confidence takes a lot of angst out of situations, which then allows us um, to engage and to work out what is actually occurring.
Um, yeah, look, I agree with everything you said. I think one of the issues that is constantly brought up when I'm talking to people is how police can identify someone who's under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or someone who may appear that way but has autism or a brain injury or an intellectual disability. So what sort of steps do the police take to sort of resolve that problem on identifying those conditions rather than thinking that they're drunk or they're on drugs?
Well, this is about realistically awareness, uh, because the issue for police is first and foremost um, attending and as I said before, trying to keep everyone safe. Because at the beginning of an engagement, realistically, um, what is causing the concern um, is not the preeminent issue for us. It's about making sure we can gain control of the environment to make sure that people are safe. Then it becomes an issue of awareness and about listening and about active listening and about asking questions and being able to converse with people. And if we're having that difficulty thinking about what other resources might we be able to apply now to actually determine what it is that we're dealing with and who it is that we're dealing with. Because as I understand it from the community, particularly the community with the disability, there's a real concern that we are not um, focusing, that the people can be treated incorrectly or poorly because we're not looking to understand what really might be causing or what might be the frustration here. So again, that is about our first contact, trying to create that environment where we have control, where people are safe. We can then start to listen and start to engage with people to work out and understand from people what actually is the cause for concern here, and then how it is that we can assist. To sometimes build more than awareness into a force which deals with a range of issues every day can sometimes be detrimental if we're having people wanting to diagnose rather than focusing on the environment, making sure that everyone's safe, and then looking at what resources we can apply to a particular situation to get to where we need to be. And I think that is the best way forward for us. And that is something we'll have to continue to work with, continue to work with clinicians as we continue to develop this training, which is the idea of making sure that every year police are continuing to receive training.
Look, I understand what you're saying, and everyone I talk to knows that the police have a hard job. It is hard, and we all understand that. We can't put ourselves in your shoes, like you can't put yourself in the shoes of a person with a disability. Um, but that's the career that people choose to take, is to join the police force, and with that comes responsibility of trying to understand that some people who have autism or have an intellectual disability or has a brain injury, they may not comprehend what people are saying straight away. It might take a few seconds to tick over, and that's where people get confused on, you know, people being drunk or being disorderly. I'll give you another example. There was a lady here in Armidale. She had MS and she was struggling to walk along, and another woman walked past and said, "Oh, fancy being drunk this time of the morning." It's that
Yeah.
sort of, um, how should I put it? People
No, it's
just
that sort
aren't.
of abuse, Jeff. Like you are 100% right, and I agree entirely with everything you're saying. That is absolutely unfair. It is disrespectful, and it should not occur. So I do agree with you, and that's why um, we are really very much focused on um, training in terms of awareness, so that police, when they're going to something, do not have that unconscious bias, because that
So
is
that,
absolutely not treating people with respect.
yeah, and like you said, it is awareness. And if you haven't been around people who have a disability, or you just don't know, and that's understandable. But what I want to try and hammer out here is what type of training is provided for the police to help identify those issues between, you know, cognitive impairment through a disability or a mental health issue. So what specific training is provided?
Well, as I'd said earlier, um, the police training provides a range of information to police about disabilities which exist, and how that they might manifest. Uh, that, though, must come second to, and I'll go back and explain why I say this because I'm certainly not diminishing it, comes second to that predominant view that we need to attend scenes, um, gain control of the environment, make people safe. And it's at that point that we can engage, really listen and listen actively so that we can start to bring to bear some of those thoughts around the awareness training that they have been given, which we can then apply to seeking the assistance of other resources which exist. So, for example, the Justice Advocacy Service. We work with also a range of clinicians in command in terms of a mental health aspect. Now, I know that is not disability, but those people can also provide us advice about when we're saying this is confronting us. This is how can we best deal with this? What other resources might be available? Um, and then that sort of stuff then work flows through into our crime management support units and our crime prevention command, who house people with expertise that we can continue to work with as we develop that training. So um, I absolutely understand the frustration. Um, I appeared last year, the year before last, I think it might have been, at the Royal Commission into disability. And it's very, very clear from community what those concerns are, and they're real. From a personal sense, I feel it daily myself, in that I am, the carer for my elderly cousin who suffers a disability, and only a few weeks ago was in the bank, and I was very disappointed by the response. So, having that lived experience, I'm quite conscious of the thoughts and concerns that people have. Um, and as I say, we're continuing to work towards how we can best address those issues, because people deserve to be treated with respect, and they deserve to be treated properly, and they need to understand that. And we need people to be confident that regardless of who you are, that you are receiving the service that you deserve from police. Because as you say, Jeff, we chose this job, and we're bound to provide that service to community. And if we're falling short, well, we need to continue these discussions and start to talk about what are the things that we can build, which is part of the discussions today, and that we'll engage with going forward.
Yeah, look, yeah, look, it is hard to try and um, educate people on different types of disabilities. It's
Mm,
not an easy thing to do, and that's why I reached out. But in the news, I'm not going to ask you to comment on these cases. I'm just showing, like, as an example, Claire Nolans, that 90-year-old woman, the woman in South Australia who was picked up out of a wheelchair and put on a bench. The guy in Queensland was taken down by a police officer up there and ended up with a fractured skull. And it's just there's a gap there between um, the police and the community, and I want to breach that gap. And to do that, we need to understand each other. The you said before that the police have reached out to different clinicians and all that, which is great. Um, but what people fail to understand is that these clinicians and experts, they actually get their information from people with disabilities
mm,
themselves. So um, it'd be good if you could bypass that middleman and go straight towards the local community, and talk to people there. Um, it's um, I could talk for the rest of the hour on how people should interact with a person who's blind. Yeah, we just don't have that time, and I understand that. But so
No, but I
one,
think, Jeff, I'd like, I don't mind, in fact, enjoy these conversations because you're quite right. Like hearing lived experience can assist in guiding responses. So,
yeah,
I'm quite open to continuing these discussions and then me having those discussions with those people who are dealing with the training aspect of it because that improves our response. If it improves our response, we're improving the confidence of the community. If we're improving the confidence in the community, we're going to have people, and I've heard the stories, and they're true. People with a disability who won't report things to police because they think the cops won't do anything because they don't listen to me. Well, that's our job to change that, and I'm not for one moment suggesting that the victims are wrong and they should just do it anyway. Because if they're not feeling the support, well, then we need to change that so that we are getting the report, so we are building that confidence. Because the interaction that we can have with people can often open doors to services for people who require assistance. And I certainly don't want people not contacting them because you don't have confidence in the police. That's a big problem for us. So we need to continue the conversation and we need to talk, and we do need to hear it, as you said, from the people who are at the coalface and who are affected and who are being impacted.
well, that sort of leads me into another part of the things I want to talk about today is um, if a person with a disability has an interaction with the police. Um, do the police notify the person they're talking to, especially if they have an intellectual disability or some sort of impairment, um, what their rights are? They can have a support worker with them, all that sort of stuff. During
Yes,
question. Yeah. Okay.
yes. And we're governed, so there's actually legislative support for that in our LEPRA, which in New South Wales, our law enforcement regulations, which um, tell us that if a person is suffering a disability, then we are required to provide them support or at least make contact with an advocacy service who can provide that independent support so that that person is supported during any interview process. Um, those those matters are well supported by the courts as well, which
Right.
is the reassurance that people should have um, that those rights um, are certainly preserved not only by police in our obligations, but are very much policed by the courts when they are dealing with matters.
So, can a person with a disability or their carer or support worker stop sort of like an interview or questioning until they get the appropriate service provider in to someone to help?
Every person, Jeff, has the right to silence. Um, there are additional obligations placed on police to ensure that people are represented during interviews if they are suffering from some type of cognitive impairment. If a person is a juvenile, um, uh, in a range of other areas, there are a similar set of rules, if you like, which apply that are put in place to protect the rights of the people who are dealing with police.
Oh,
And if
that's good
somebody
to know.
doesn't want to say, if somebody doesn't want to say anything, they just need to say, "I do not want to say anything."
Yeah, but you said before that if the police are talking to someone with a disability, then they have to sort of reach out to an advocacy organisation to help the person with a disability. Yeah, these things aren't really public knowledge. They're not really talked about. So, how do we overcome that? So how do we overcome that lack of knowledge of what police are required to provide?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. That is a difficult one because within police, it is well known, and at police stations it's well advertised in terms of, in New South Wales, the existence of the Justice Advocacy Service. How we get that into community, it will be a question for me, Jeff, that I'll have to take away and think about. But these conversations are certainly places that hopefully people can watch and will replay, and they will hear me saying that, one, everyone has a right to silence, no matter who that person is. Two, if someone is suffering some form of cognitive impairment, they're also entitled to support people to assist them during the investigative process. How we get that information to community, Jeff, is through people like you. So what I can do is I can actually send you some things following this interview that might explain some of those services which are available and which I will undertake to do.
That'd be great. So that information, will that be in an accessible format? And for people who have a intellectual disability or learning impairment, will it be in plain English so they can understand it?
I believe so, Jeff. But what I'll need to do is confirm that, because they're not actually the police force's documents. They're our Department of Communities and Justice. And I should say, for people who might be online, I can only speak from a New South Wales Police Force perspective. These are not Commonwealth in nature. So each of the states, though, has a similar framework. And anyone who might be online, not from New South Wales, you could make inquiries of your police forces in relation to specific services and or obligations which fall to police in your particular state or territory.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. Thank you for that. You're talking before about getting going on sooner and taking control of the situation. If something's going on that sort of how should I put it? Somebody's sort of behaving sort of not normally. So, what sort of de-escalation skills do the police use to help take control of that situation?
In the initial sense, as I've said, it's about us attending. And when I say take control of the environment, I don't mean physically take control of people. I mean take control of the environment, as in make sure that people are safe. Now, that might be if a person were
Agitated.
agitated.
Yep.
That might be standing off at a safe distance and talking from that safe distance, and that might be sufficient control in the environment, because if the person is not necessarily harming anyone else or is not at risk of harming themselves, that gives us an opportunity to have people at a safe distance and commence that active listening, that discussion, that engagement. Time is a thing, and time is that we've got time and we're not pressed for time. Is that we're taking the time to listen, think about what's actually happening, get what information is that we can. If we know who the person is, what inquiries can we make about that person while we're still engaging, which might reveal some information which is useful for us in discussions with the person. So when I say controlling the environment, I mean making people safe, making the engagement, whatever it might be, safe. In the really difficult circumstances, it might be creating a wider perimeter type area for that engagement, for that discussion to take place in. So it's not a limited, finite range of things that we will do. It is about basically responding to the situation as we see it, controlling the environment, controlling ourselves, really, really focus on listening, um, engaging, and then trying to determine and understand what is occurring so that we can apply the right resources and the best response.
So I think part of the de-escalation skills is the ability for the police to identify triggers um, that may affect some people. I know I've got friends with brain injuries, um, um, autism. Certain things, or words, phrases, actions, even the police uniform can trigger um, someone to become agitated and not being able to communicate. So now, how do the police identify those sorts of triggers? Generally speaking, I know you can't speak specifically, but generally,
Yeah, and that's difficult because in circumstances often, Jeff, that police must respond as quickly as we can to these incidents so that people are safe. So the first police on the scene there will most likely be uniformed officers. Um, which again, I know it sounds like I'm harping on things, but which is why it's so important for us is to get there so we can get control of an environment so that then you can make some of these decisions. Um, because we have such a localized policing force and we're broken up into a range of commands, one of the benefits of that is that um, we do come to know our community. So that is a large part of it, as well as being aware of people in our community where we can start to understand some things. Um, but as I said at the outset, one of the real difficulties for us is that, sometimes overtraining to a range of things can be problematic in that people can start to apply things which might not necessarily be impacting. So if we get to that base situation, as I say, of controlling the environment, starting to listen, really focusing on each situation individually, building our awareness underneath that, that's when I would suggest that people will become much more alive to considering triggers um, and moving away from those types of triggering events as much as we can. Uniforms is a difficult thing, um, but what I also like is that whilst we don't get it right all the time, Jeff, um, we know that. What I am pleased about though is that we get it right a lot more than what we actually get it wrong. And so that's the human side of thing that comes from the police who are attending as well, who are quite understanding, who are very much, I know in my commands, very much led um, in my and to my expectation about, it's about getting outcomes for people, getting proper outcomes for people, because um, we do not want to create more difficult situations. We don't want to create more difficult situations for people who might be agitated. They're not criminals. I've heard some horror stories, and it happens. I don't deny it, where people are dealt with, not well, and
yeah,
situations get blown out of proportion where because we haven't taken the time to think, respond, listen, um, and that's why it's so important we really continue to progress down this road. But um, you know, we're we're in a situation where we can be offending people who are not criminals and if we misjudge situations, and that is very frustrating for people, and it's offensive for them, and that's where we're really angling not to be.
yeah. Look, I had a someone emailed me yesterday with a couple of questions, which we've already touched on, but one that this person asked me to ask was that when police deal with someone who's deaf or hearing impaired, they tell the police that they're deaf, and the police keep talking like they can hear them. Um, So it's better for the police to either write it down or send a text or something like that. That's the sort of thing I'm trying to sort of like bring awareness to, that um, there's a lot of different disabilities out there, and we all have our own strengths and weaknesses. But it doesn't take all that much to help educate other people. So, yeah, where can we, how do we, as people with disabilities, help educate the police?
We continue to have these discussions because for me, my discussion won't end here. I'll be talking with Chris Nicholson, my very good friend who runs our Crime Prevention Command and who is continuing to develop this training. And we'll have a conversation around what we've spoken about today to say, listen, how can we, what can we think about here? Um, so, you're a valuable resource for us in having these conversations. Some of the stuff that you talk about there is just absolute common sense. And if I would be so disappointed with my police if somebody didn't have that very simple thought to say, listen, this person's hearing impaired. I've got a phone here. I could write it out in a note and say, and use that, or I could handwrite a note, or very rudimentary sign. This sort of stuff. It's simple human behaviour that I want to see from my police, and that is clearly my expectation. Now, that sort of stuff, though, I agree with you, I think does need to be said.
Look,
And that's a leadership issue.
like I said before, and I've come across this a lot over the last 30 plus years, that if people don't have exposure to people with disabilities, they just don't know. And we need to understand that and to educate that those people, and we need to be patient. And the same goes with the police. This is why, I was asking about the training. Like, it's just basic things like how to talk to someone who's deaf or hearing impaired, um, how to talk to somebody who's blind or vision impaired, how to talk to somebody who has an intellectual disability or has autism. It's pretty, generally speaking, it can be pretty basic training, and that can be built on over the years. Um, that's what I'm trying to talk about here today, is that sort of training at the basic level by the police.
I don't
Um,
disagree at all. Do not disagree, and it'll be something, and I will come back to you, Jeff, to say,
yep.
look, I've had this conversation, and that's something I'm very, very happy to continue to talk about because I think you make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and my support worker Chris, we were looking on the website the other day, last week, and there was a community program where people from the community can volunteer um, to work with the police, and this is a good opportunity for people with disabilities to step up. Do you agree?
It potentially, and I say that potentially because you always come back to these situations. If we're going to have people in our buildings and in our workspaces, that's something that we would need to make sure that we are properly catered for. But I don't see an issue where we would not and could not, and I would like to see locally, because we run, apart from training that's run, annually, as I'm talking about now, our commands have training days where they train local days. So I don't see a situation. Uh, I do see a situation where it would be good, commands could have people from the community come and talk to individual police commands, which I think is very effective because um, reducing these matters to that local level builds that community feel. So I think, um, yes, there are certainly things that we can consider there.
I think so. I think if the police have direct contact with the person with the disability, and we talk about our life experiences, then that gives the police more information on how to interact with the person with a disability, and yeah, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, that sort of thing.
No, I do agree. I do agree.
Yeah, but there was that program that community members can volunteer um, to the police, like the local police force, like here in Armidale. I could go down and volunteer my time um, for what
Yeah, that,
uh,
you're right. The volunteers in policing.
yeah. So that would be a good opportunity for someone like myself to to step up and help bridge that gap.
Very much so. And those volunteers are still in police stations nowadays, and people can approach their local area commands or their police district commands, their police stations, I should say, makes it easier to inquire about the volunteering policing program and is it operating within that particular police command.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity. But so with the police, do you like continually train, like have training days once every 1 or 2 years, 3 years on
Um,
different sort of like different topics?
well, we have a range of training which continues on an annual basis across a range of issues. In particular, um, our response to people um, who are agitated or suffering some episode or some affliction um, is now an annual part of the training rotation. So each year by rotation, 1 year will be online training, the next year will be face to face training, and that is from probationary constable to commissioner um, because our response um, is very, very important to us, and continuing to develop that response is important. And that includes a whole range of training that we do. And there's ongoing training in detectives courses in our crime management units who undertake specific training throughout the year. So there is a range of training which continues across the organisation. But at its base, every officer will be from this year, it is commenced in fact, will be trained annually in our responses.
I think that's great.
It's a big change, Jeff, and I think it's we did have a 4-day course a number of years back, which trained quite a small number of people on a large amount of information. That's been flipped on its head now to the extent that we train every police officer on a range of information, which broadens that base. But the fact that it occurs annually now will continue to build that base. So, while I wouldn't say that all of a sudden overnight we've become the best trained police force in the world, but we're certainly um, very well equipped in terms of the training that's happening now. The additional training which will occur each year will just build that base. So our response will continue to improve.
Great. Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that that the annual training and the rotation. There's a lot of work to be done there from both from all parties. Um, like I said, everyone knows the police have a hard job. And I'm not sort of trying to detract from that, but um, upskilling is sort of like is why I wanted to do this today. Um, I actually had someone reach out to me about 12 months ago, and this person had a disability. They had children. Their partner got in trouble with the law, and she was scared of the criminal justice system.
Mm.
You know, what avenues are there for people who don't know their rights? I mean, I know there's legal aid, but sometimes they're really hard to get into. I've tried getting the legal aid before myself, and it can be quite difficult to get in. But what other avenues are there?
In New South Wales, very specifically, there is the Justice Advocacy Service, which is a service which is specifically provided by government for this very purpose. Because as you say, the court process is daunting for a lot of people. If you add the complexity of accessibility and disability, it can become more daunting, which is where the Justice Advocacy Service is there to provide assistance to people who might require it. That again is in New South Wales.
Yep. Other states would have something similar, though.
You would hope so. I can't speak for everyone else, but I do think they have a similar program.
Great. All right. Yeah, I don't, there's not much more I sort of wanted to get through today, but sorry, Chris. Yeah, we have a question. You want
Hi, Tony. Just reading out a question from Marie Lewis, who's worked in the mental health area, and she's asking about bringing counsellors in on welfare checks, because she said that there's been situations which have escalated, where police have been banging on people's doors and frightened them, which causes people to cover up or to run. And she was saying that she thinks that it would be a great idea to have counsellors on board for welfare checks, because just having police in uniform scares people.
Look, that can occur. And I didn't catch who the question came from, but it's a pertinent question for us at the moment, because in actual fact, at the very time the organisation has drafted in a superintendent to review these matters, particularly those matters involving mental health, and how is it that we can potentially improve those responses, because as you say, in some situations, police attending at a door can it can cause an issue, to be frank, if we're honest about things, and that's generally people on treatment plans who have not met their obligations or who have not presented themselves for appointments, and there are concerns for their welfare. Those situations can become difficult. Can I just give you the assurance, though, that having been in the cops now 37 odd years, and knowing my expectation of my police is that, I very much ask of my police that we're thinking about where we're going and what we're doing and why we're doing it, no matter what situation it is that we attend. So I would like to think, and I'm certain that police know of my expectation, that when we are attending these things, we're doing so as sensitively as possible. In New South Wales, for example, we have the PACER program, where we have mental health clinicians working with police commands, and they will in fact often attend those situations with us. So the engagement is in fact with a clinician, not a police officer. Now that program and all our responses around the response to mental health incidents is being reviewed by a superintendent who has been drafted offline to take on that role of reviewing our responses and developing some options for consideration by the Commissioner's executive team. So it's a pertinent point and a very good one.
Yeah, and the whole process is evolving. It does take time, but yeah. Is there any other questions? No other questions. Yeah, that's probably all I had for you today, Tony. I do appreciate you coming along and talking. It's been quite good. Is there anything you want to put out?
No, just to thank you, Jeff. I really do enjoy the opportunities to come and talk to people. Unfortunately, when you progress through the ranks, you sometimes can become detached from community. So it's I really enjoy the opportunities to come and talk with people. Can I just say, at its core, from a New South Wales perspective, and I know very much from my colleagues in police forces around the country, our service to community, and particularly people who may have some vulnerability, is very important to us, because people need to have confidence in the police. That's, whilst we might say it's a difficult job, that's fine, but there are lots of difficult jobs. And we all just need to make sure that we're doing a good job. Part of that for me is very much providing support to our communities, and in particular people who have some vulnerability, so that everybody gets to enjoy what it is that they want to do in peace and to be able to do as they please. And that means that we need people to have confidence in the police, and to do that, we really do need to be providing a proper response that respects all people. That certainly is my view. I know that is the very strong view of my commissioner, who, in her own document, nominates the silent victims, the people who can't necessarily speak for themselves, or who need us and need support. So it's very much in the mind of the commissioner and the organisation. So, mate, I do appreciate your time. I'll get back to you with some information around the Justice Advocacy Service. I'll also get back to you just around some discussions about some training and the potential for some lived experience, I think, in developing that, because I do think that is a very, very good idea, and it's something that I'd like to talk more about.
Yeah, if I can help at any time in the future, you have my contact info. There's one thing I did want to touch on before we go. I forgot to ask this before. We talked about people with disabilities and people who are vulnerable, but what about cultural differences, especially like we spoke before we went live about the community up here, the refugee community up here. I know there's a few people there with disabilities as well, but how do the police go into part of the community where culturally the police aren't trusted?
Fortunately, that's also part of my sponsorship. And you're right, and a range of issues come together in multicultural communities. We work very closely with Multicultural New South Wales. We work very closely with a range of multicultural advocacy groups, sharing these same messages around people with disabilities and what services are available, accessibility. The added complexity in there is the cultural barrier that we need to also break down, and in particular language barriers. And we saw that during COVID, where many, a range of people who were requiring assistance, but had difficulty dealing with police, many of them from refugee communities who had come from countries where the relationship with police and community was very poor, to say the least. So it adds a range of complexity, but we do that by coming together with the range of agencies who represent multicultural communities at both the government and non-government agency level.
So does every station have like a community officer, like someone who works with different sections of the community?
Yes, we have our crime prevention officers within our crime prevention units, and they work across community. They are supported by a range of multicultural liaison officers that, while they're not in every command, they're certainly in commands across the state, and are accessible through a coordinated program from Sydney. So if we had, say, an issue, as we spoke prior to going live, I was recently in Armidale speaking with our Yazidi community, and you're fortunate there in Armidale to have Mr. Laksa as the police commander up there, who supports Mr. Cooper, who's the OIC at Armidale. They are very connected with the community up there. So it works in that program and in that manner.
So if someone who's vulnerable has a disability or from culturally diverse background like the refugees, if they have a complaint about a police officer, who do they turn to? Where do they go to lodge that complaint?
If anybody has a complaint about a police officer, my advice would be that you write to your local police commander. You might write to the commissioner. That can be done online. It can be done by contacting the police assistance line, which is accessible and available. And I can get you those contact details, Jeff, because they've just escaped me, which is terrible. But I will get you that information and get it through so you can distribute it. But
Yep.
in any circumstance, if somebody has an issue with police, my best advice would be to contact your local police station and ask to speak with the inspector on duty.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I really do appreciate you coming along today and talking. It's been a great source of information for me personally. And I'll look forward to hearing and getting some information back from you at a later stage. Um, is there anything else you'd like to mention, or?
No, and it's always good, as I said before. So thank you very much for the invitation.
No, I really. We've been playing phone tag for
I
a
know,
few weeks.
my apologies.
These things happen.
And I got back from holidays only Monday at spending some time at Port Douglas in the warm, which was nice.
You should try being up in the middle of winter. We had -10 there for a while. It was you go outside and your face just burns from the cold.
Thanks. It's very nice up north, apart from the crocodiles.
Yeah, I've got a cousin who's lives up in Cairns. They have winters there like 20 degrees. And he laughs at me. He says, "Oh, what's the weather like?" So we had -9 last night, and he's killing himself laughing. But yeah, no, it was good. I appreciate you giving up your time and allowing me to ask you these questions.
Not a problem.
It's been a great experience, and I really do appreciate it.
All right, well, next time I'm up in Armidale, we'll drop in and say hello.
We'll have a coffee together. Yeah, that'd be good.
That'll be nice. We'll catch up. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Bye. Okay, everyone. So that was the Assistant Commissioner, Tony Cooke, who very kindly gave up his time. He's a very busy man. Been playing phone tag with his office for a couple of weeks, which happens. But I hope everyone who's watched this today or going to watch it later on gets a lot of useful information out of it. It's been a great talk. That's probably about it for today. Is there anything? That's it. Okay, we'll end that stream there today. And thanks again to Assistant Commissioner Cooke. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks everyone.